Summer is coming.
Time to make a hydromel.
Okay, a hydromel. In some parts of the world, hydromel is just a term for mead. I just want to be clear on that. We are actually talking about a type of mead, which is a very light mead. It's normally under 8%, and sometimes they're carbonated, sometimes they're hopped. It's very much like a beer or a cider in most ways. So we're gonna make one of those today. Really, really simple, probably the simplest mead you can ever possibly make, and it's the fastest, meaning it's, from start to drinking much more quickly than, from start to drinking much more quickly than most other meads. So, to make this, you're going to need some honey. We happen to be using Bevy's Orange Blossom Honey today. I'm also going to be using 1.5 grams of Fermentation in a little bit of water. That is our nutrient for the yeast, okay? You wanna keep your yeast happy, let them ferment cleanly, let them ferment fully, and no issues. And we're going to be using some Safe Ale SO4 yeast. Now,
and the only other ingredient is water.
Yeah, that's it. But I wanna say something else. Every time we do a recipe like this, someone always asks, can I use this honey? Can I use that yeast? Can I use this? The answer is almost always, yes, you can. However, it will be different, okay? That yeast strain is specific for ales and things like that. So it's going to work really, really well at our low gravity and low ABV that we're making. This honey we chose because it's a really high quality honey, probably the highest quality honey that we've ever had, because we know the person that collects it. We know how they do it. It's as close to what the bees eat themselves as possible. So it's the best thing you can do. And that's when you get into that. These very simple meads, these very simple brews, you need the best ingredients in order to get the best product. Does that mean that you can't go to the grocery store and just get honey and make it? No, of course not. You can totally do that. It will not be the same, or most likely won't be the same. If you've never had mead before, you might not know the difference, and it might be a great way to start. So don't think for a minute that, oh, I don't have access to that, I can't make that. Don't think that way. The one thing that's maybe sort of optional this time is Fermentation. I do like to keep the yeast happy. It is a low enough original gravity that you might not need it, but it doesn't hurt to add a little bit anyway. That's why I'm using 1.5 grams.
Particularly since we have so few ingredients. Really, all that this is yeast, honey, and water. And honey doesn't really have all the things that yeast need to make them truly happy.
Right.
And that's why, in this particular recipe, it's probably a good idea, if you have access to it, to add some Fermentation.
Alrighty, so I have a funnel, I have my fermenter on a scale, and I'm going to measure out pounds and ounces, because it was on grams. I'm going to measure out my pound of honey. Really, really simple. Measure out a pound of honey, pour it right in. Okay, so let me explain a little bit of what's happening here. First, I poured the honey in, 1 pound. Now, here's the way some of the numbers work. If you're just getting started in brewing, this isn't uber critical to know right away, but it's good to have a foundation and understand. 1 pound of honey in a 1 gallon of must, not with a gallon of water additional, because that would be more than a gallon. In a full gallon of must should be approximately a 1.035 specific gravity. Okay, so for every pound of honey, you have 35 points, or 0.035, okay? If you don't know what specific gravity is, we have videos that explain that aspect. So go watch those and then come back and this will make a lot more sense. Then, because I know I want to keep this under 8%, I know that 0.035 comes out to something like a 4.5 or 4.6% ABV. Because this is lower ABV, I'm actually using the 131.25 number, not my normal 135, because that makes this more accurate. Let me explain what I mean by that. The calculation for ABV is original gravity, which would be approximately 1.035, minus our final gravity, which should be somewhere around 1.000. Gives us 0.035. Multiply that by 131.25 and you get 4.5 or 4.6%. That's how we calculate alcohol in a brew. Very, very simple. This is at its simplest. If none of that made sense, like I said, we have videos that explain it all. They'll be linked in there. Derek is going to put links and all that kind of stuff. Check the description if you don't see a card. Now, one caveat. Bevies, honey, breaks that rule. It's not always 0.035. Some of them are a little bit more. So as long as we're under 8%, according to the rules of hydromels, we'll still be a hydromel. Does anyone really care if it's 8.5%? Well, no, but I don't, we want to make a hydromel, so I want it to be 8%. So even if we have super honey, it's still only going to be probably like 6 to 7%. So we're good. The next step is a little bit of water. I'm not going to put all the water in because, right now there's honey stuck in the thing and I got to mix this up still. So I have water. Now, if your tap water smells like the local pool, you probably don't want to brew with that, okay? Ours is filtered, so the chlorine's been removed, sediment's been removed. Other than that, it is tap water, so it still has all the mineralization and things like that that's in there. If you have an RO filter with a remineralizer, go ahead and use that. If you have a well and you've checked it, go ahead and use that. Basically, if you can drink your tap water, you can probably brew with it. Are there better options? Yes, some spring water. Go ahead and buy bottled water from the store. It's gonna be better than most tap waters, I'll be honest with you. Our tap water, I've actually tested the flavor of it versus some of the bottled waters, and I liked it better than a lot of the bottled water. So we save a couple dollars every time we make a brew, and we just use our tap water. But like I said, it's filtered. Now, I have it full about halfway.
We don't need our scale anymore, so let's get rid of that.
Good idea. It was in the way. All right. I didn't do a really good job of getting all the honey out of there, so I'm just gonna put the funnel right in with the rest of the water. Now, you might be wondering, I only have a half full fermenter with some honey in there. Yeah, exactly. My water was warm. I would say it was probably only about body temperature. I don't like to say room temperature because room temperature is different for everybody. We have a friend in England whose room temperature is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Ours is more like 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. But then, if you live in the tropics, it could be as high as 90. So saying room temperature doesn't make a lot of sense, but body temperature, unless your body temperature is significantly different than normal, it's usually around 98 degrees. It's half full of water because there's something I have to do. By the way, the first thing that you should do that we just did with this bung off camera is sanitize everything. And for that, we put everything in
the red bucket of sanitization.
It is that red bucket right over her shoulder. Basically, it's a red bucket filled with Star San solution. If you don't know what that is, it's actually a sanitizer. Not sterilized, sanitized. There's a distinct difference. What we want to do is make sure that all the nastiness and infections that could possibly happen get removed. Our hands have all been cleaned that way. The Star San is all over everything. All this stuff here has all been sanitized. The fermenter, the only thing we didn't sanitize is the honey. And honey doesn't need to be sanitized. It's just a thing. So I'm going to put this in here, and in the very beginning you want to introduce oxygen. This is always where people get messed up. They think, oh, I don't want to put air in there. In the beginning you do, because the yeast need that in order to build up a colony.
The only time during fermentation when oxygen is an issue is once alcohol has been produced.
And why is that?
That's because as long as it's underneath 10% ABV, acetobacters, which will turn alcohol into vinegar, can be activated.
And they are present already. The acetobacters are there. It's kind of like yeast. They're
everywhere.
They're a microorganism that just exists everywhere. I mean, they're in the air, they're in the honey, they're in the water. They're already there. But you don't want to entice them to make vinegar. Notice the color change. That's because it's been oxygenated. Well, aerated, technically, because it wasn't just oxygen that was added. It also makes foam, so you want to be a little bit careful. You don't want too much foam, but you do want to aerate properly. So I'm going to aerate. This is also known as shaking the bejesus out of it. Okay. There wasn't a lot of honey, and everything was a little bit warm, so it mixed in really, really nicely. So we're good there. Now, put my funnel back in and fill this up more or less the rest of the way. Now, before I go too far, I do want to add the Fermentation. And there's a good reason for that. It's a little bit of a powder. I mix it with just, I don't know, an ounce of water, but it could stick to the funnel a little bit, and I want to make sure that it all gets in there. 1.5 grams. I actually used a scale to weigh that out. It's a very small amount, so use a scale. I'm just going to add some water back in to rinse that through. Probably not a bad time to add our yeast either. And I happen to have a half packet lying around, which a lot of people make fun of me for having half packets of yeast. We used to use half packets to do everything. And for something like this, you probably only need like a fifth of this packet, but I'm gonna use the half that's left just because. I don't know how old this yeast is. We do keep it in the fridge, so it usually lasts for years, but this one might be nearing its time. So we're just gonna put this in. And again, doing it right through the funnel, which is a bad idea, because it just sticks to everything. But I have more water to go in. Also, thwack your packet, you know? Make sure you... She made me laugh that time. Usually I can keep a straight face through that. It just gets all the yeast out of it, okay? Then I'm just going to add more water to rinse all that yeast in. At this point, you gotta start asking yourself, how greedy do you wanna be versus do you wanna take a chance on that getting up into the neck? I know this could be a rather active fermentation in the very beginning, so I want to be a little bit careful, but I'm greedy, so I want to get as much product as I possibly can too. Now, something really important. These fermenters say 1 gallon on the side, and if you fill it to just below where it says 1 gallon, like about that much below, it is 1 gallon. If you go above that 1 gallon marking, it's actually like 1.2 gallons. So by the time you remove some of the lees at the end, whoops, we're gonna call that good. By the time you remove some of the lees at the end, you actually end up with really, really close to 1 gallon, because there shouldn't be a lot of wastage with this. And that is just an inevitable part of brewing. A lot of people have been asking lately, oh, can I filter it? Can I do this? You can try. I don't really think you're gonna get much out of it. Some people like to do it and just get every last drop, and that's perfectly fine, it's okay. We don't usually bother, just seems like a lot of trouble for not much return.
So now we have everything in there. We need to give it a final mix just to make sure that everything is incorporated before we take our gravity reading.
Looks like lemonade. It really does. Or like a really light apple juice. Okay, and we're back to that specific gravity thing again. And what that basically does is it measures the density of the liquid. So that way we know by using some calculation how much sugars there are in here. And I'm using what we call Mega Made. Insert your own joke here. But it's really just a huge syringe with a tube. And I put it into a graduated cylinder. Fill it up till it floats. Put the rest back in. Some people don't do this. I don't know why. Oops. Some people don't put the rest back in. I don't know why. I'm not some people. I don't want to waste this. This is good stuff. But I'm done with this now. Okay, so our reading. Let's see how accurate Bevy's honey is today. Not bad. 2, 4, 6. Looks to be 1.036, so very, very, very close to the 35 points. Let me make a note of that. By the way, always take notes, very important. When I first started brewing, and even up until we started using the channel, I really didn't take good notes much at all. I might have written down the date I started it and what it was, and that was about it. But today I have written on this Hydromel 2022, because this is our 2022 version of Hydromel, and today's date is March 30th, 2022. I have 1 pound of Bev's Orange Blossom Honey, 1/2 a packet of Safe Ale SO4 yeast, 1.5 grams of Fermentation, and it's a 1.036 original gravity. Easy. Again, with the sample, I'd pour that back in. There's no reason to waste that. Okay, to cap this off, you want to use a bung and an airlock. Now, there's a couple kinds of airlocks. They don't have to look like this. There's another one that looks like just a little cup with a lid on it. The reason for using an airlock is you do not want any bugs or nasties or bacteria or anything getting inside. We filled this with star sand. Don't use regular water. Bugs can get through that and they can still survive.
And just so that you're not confused, we didn't fill this with pure star sand.
Oh,
We filled
yeah.
this with the proper diluted amount of star sand.
It came out of turbos, so it's the exact measurements that it should be. Now, if your bung doesn't stay in all on its own and make a good seal, you can always just stick a rubber band around it to hold it in place. Some people will tape it in there. Don't use super glue. Somebody did that. Don't do that. That would be bad. But anyway, so the airlock also gives you an indication that there's activity. It doesn't necessarily mean it's fermenting well or if it's fermenting slowly. Don't count bubbles. It doesn't do you any good unless you just like the entertainment value of it, because it really isn't a good indication of fermentation being finished or still ongoing, because it's going to degas afterwards too, but that's a whole other story. Don't be tempted to use a balloon either, though they do work, okay? They are not necessarily sanitary. Sure, you can sanitize and all that, but it's just, I don't know, more trouble than it's worth.
If you have the option and you have the means, use an airlock.
Absolutely. They're like $3, okay? Just use an airlock.
So at this point, we're expecting this to start fermenting. And because we are close to the top and because this is a newish relative to us recipe, but really, even if we've done it 1,000 times, the thing that we're going to stress to you is to put this on a tray with edges
Cookie sheet.
before it starts going, because you never know. Those yeasts might be just really happy and throw a party in there and erupt out your airlock. That is not a bad thing. It's just a messy thing.
Right. What she's talking about is sometimes this foam will get up into the airlock, and sometimes even the must itself can get up in there. When that happens, take the airlock off, clean it all out, put it back on. Just do that. It's okay. The little bit of exposure to the air is not a problem. A lot of people used to ferment open, still do. We don't, because we have cats, and I really don't want cat hair in my brew. So we try really hard to eliminate that. So we try to limit exposure. However, if it continues to happen over and over and over and it's just driving you crazy, we do have a video on blow-off tubes that'll explain how to basically make it foolproof, and you won't have any trouble at all for the first couple of days. So what are we going to do with this now?
We're going to let it sit.
This will probably only take a week or two to fully ferment, okay? It should. It could take longer, so don't freak out. In our environment, at the temperatures we are, with the honeys we use, we do this all the time. We know it's going to take approximately a week to 2 weeks to go. It'll probably start up for us in just a few hours. It could take up to 3 days, okay? So don't freak out. If after 3 or 4 days you have no activity, add more yeast. You'll be fine, but don't use the same packet. Use a different packet, a different whole yeast altogether would probably be best, because that way you're not just throwing in the same dead yeast over and over again. But 9 times out of 10, they just work. If your environment is too cold, and I mean like below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, it could take a little longer. It could be a little bit slower. If it's much, much, much colder than 60, warm it up, because it's just not going to work. And conversely, if you're over, say, 90 degrees, you probably want to cool it down a little bit. There's lots of ways to do that too, but that's a whole other video. We will be back in a few minutes, though it might be a few hours for this, to show you what it looks like as it's fermenting. Okay, so it's been like an hour and we have bubbles, which means it's fermenting, which means this is going to go in the fermentation station for like a week or two, and then we'll be back to show you what it looks like then. But there's bubbles in here, there's bubbles in here, it's bubbling, something's happening. That's what it's supposed to do. So just so you know, that's what this looks like. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
So it's been like an hour. It's bubbling. There's some bubbles down here too. The foam has actually dissipated and it's just, you know, bubbles. But it's going. That's a good start. That's all we really needed it to do. So we're gonna let this go for like a week or two, and then we'll be back to show you what it does and what it looks like then. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
We really need to do that again. That was so grumpy and bad.
I know.